Okay, looking at the time, I think it is time for us to get started. So I will switch back from screen, and now everybody should be able to see us as the speakers. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the future. This is something which we thought would be not so much possible in the near future, and suddenly we're all here. The horrible virus, which is keeping the world in a state of emergency now, has already reached the way that we interact and work together. And we hope we'll be surprised to find out how well this is functioning. It is my pleasure to welcome you, all of you who are watching on YouTube and who are listening in on Zoom, to this event which we've put together with a lot of co-organizers. I think you see most of them on the screen now. Us having organized this is Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Belarus Office, the Women's Dialogue Council International Relations, the Eastern Europe Study Center from Lithuania, the Center for Eurasian and European Studies at the Faculty of International Science from the Belarus State University, and last but not least, the United Kingdom is with us today, the GCRF Compass Project. Thank you to the organizers and to the speakers for being with us today. What we see at the moment has been labeled interesting by many observers, because I think people are struggling to find the right word in the situation, which is so open, so many ways. The future is happening now, and it seems that at the same time the world is standing still. We're in slow motion, and on the other hand, it's moving in time lapse, in fast motion. At the same time, things are shifting and happening faster than they would have otherwise. People have found out Black Swan is not only the name of a psycho thriller with Natalie Portman, but something which can be an upheaval to the international community. And now countries have been declaring war on a virus. I think this has not happened in this scope before. Somebody recently said, I think the United Nations said this is the biggest challenge to humanity. Countries declaring war, not only the French president, but also President Trump saying that he's a wartime president now. Countries using the army to help cope with the virus. Even in Lithuania, where we are based, the army is supposed to help enforce the quarantine over the Easter days to make sure people don't travel around, which was possible so far, but now will be limited over these Easter days. All the observers, all serious observers, still see that we are at the beginning of the pandemic, although some countries are already contemplating to relieve some of the measures that have been taken to contain the virus at the moment. We're at the beginning, so it's hard to make any predictions. Yet we see repercussions on security happening as we speak. There are some utopian scenarios, people believing that the world will be so much better after this, ecological, people taking time now for family and friends, and everybody will be a better person after the quarantine. Other scenarios are more dystopian, saying the things that we see now are speeding up bad trends in terms of surveillance technologies that people were skeptical of are being employed now on a big scale. But both have in common that it doesn't seem possible that we go back to a status quo ante. We don't know where we'll be ending up, but things will be different for sure. Not all will be changing, and also regarding or depending on the regions that we look at in the world, upheavals might be of lesser or bigger impact to those regions, but disruptions are sure to come. So we are happy to be here together with some very distinct and distinguished experts from 4 countries, or even 5 countries if you count origin, to discuss the repercussions on security in Central and Eastern Europe that we can now see are happening as we speak, and some predictions looking into Lithuania and Belarus particularly, but also broader speaking how in global events going to backfire or impact on the region that most of us are based in or work with. A few technical remarks before we start. I see that some people are following us on Zoom. Those of you who need translation are invited to join us on Zoom. We have interpretation from Russian to English and vice versa. If you're following us on YouTube now and you will need translation into either language, please follow us on Zoom. You can still find the password and the code on our social media channels where the whole event was announced. Second technical remark, we have a delay of, I think, 20 seconds between the discussion in Zoom and the discussion that you see on YouTube. So Direct interaction between these two will be delayed. You will see things a bit later. And this is one of the reasons why we have decided to limit the function of commenting to comments in writing. You have two possible ways to submit your comments, one of them being the Twitter channel of Min's Dialogue, the other one being Facebook chat, YouTube chat. YouTube has a function of chat that should be right next to the screen where you're following the discussion. Make sure that you're logged in to YouTube if you have a YouTube account to be able to leave your comments. It does not, or at least it did not work when we tested this yesterday, if you're not logged in. So two options, Twitter and Twitter channel of Min's Dialogue, Twitter to Min's Dialogue, and YouTube chat. If you write comments, they will be taken into consideration, will be read by the panelists, but might not be included into the conversation now because also of the delay. So please be precise. If you have a comment, then point out that you have a question, and also, if possible, to which of the speakers your question is directed. We will start with having input comments, input statements by all of the speakers. Then we will have a short first round of a discussion among the speakers, and then open up to your questions from the audience. So, welcome again, and I have the pleasure of introducing to you our first speaker, who is joining us from Berlin, who is my colleague at Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, Daniela Braun. She is writing her PhD on the topic of health security. Somebody recently said, when a colleague from Minsk who found a publication of global health, Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, that we had some idea what was coming ahead and was facing us. I think it was not only Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, but many analysts saw this as one scenario, a pandemic that could threaten global security. But Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung happens to have been building up capacities for this, and you, Daniela, you are this strategic investment into expertise in the field of health security. Before joining Adenauer-Stiftung, Daniela was working at the DGAP, the German Council on Foreign Relations, and she was working at Yale University with a fellowship for her PhD. And we agreed prior to this that Daniela is going to give us some broader impact on what security and health means if you put them together, because there's a long debate among experts that you can over-securitize any topic, because everything that happens in the world can somewhat have an influence on security, but there's some extent to which this makes sense, and some way you need to make a cut and say this is not a security topic anymore. So I think it would be great, Daniela, to hear from you, your input on the connection of these two topics. Sorry, I promised Eugenii 10 seconds for his words of welcome. Sorry, I'm a bad moderator, Eugenii. And I didn't say who I was. Maybe Eugenii, you can introduce me and then say your words of welcome.
Sure, thanks a lot, Jakob. So let me introduce our great moderator for today, Jakob Wallenstein, who is director of Belarus CAS office and who is one of the intellectual engines behind this particular event, but we are also in discussions about a series of events. And I hope everything gets us into many more questions than answers during this discussion, and it will be a good argument for us to start a proper series of discussions about something we don't really understand in the moment, but something which excites all intellectual and professional minds. So thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Jakob, for moderating, but also for putting all the organizational clouds into putting it all together.
Thank you. Daniela, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much for having me and putting this excellent event together. As Jacob already mentioned, I'm not an expert on Eastern or Central Europe, but rather I would like to give some background information on health security, the evolution of health security, and also shed some light on possible consequences of pandemics on security and stability, and also look at COVID-19, so the recent health crisis we have. So since the late 90s or early 2000s, health crises such as the rapid spread of infectious diseases are increasingly being brought into the context of security and stability. So for example, in the year 2000, the UN Security Council was dealing with HIV/AIDS as a threat to peace and security in sub-Saharan Africa, Or in 2006, the US National Security Strategy stated that pandemics like HIV or H5N1, which is avian influenza, do not recognize borders and should be dealt with through new strategies and responses. Also, the German white paper on security policy and the future of the armed forces from 2016 mentions epidemics as a possible threat to regional stability. And although pandemics are as old as mankind, there are many examples in history, the consideration of health issues as an element of national or international security is a relatively recent development and began only in the late 1990s, like I said, and I referred to some of the examples. And previously, health was considered exclusively as an issue of law politics, and security threats were essentially limited to external military threats. But this changed due to mainly two underlying trends. The first trend I would like to mention here is the overall broadening of the security concept after the end of the Cold War. Security policy was no longer solely understood as fending off external military threats, but the focus shifted increasingly towards a connection between development and security. And the other trend ensuring that the health security concept prevailed is a phenomenon which experts described as the return of the modern epidemics. So due to different megatrends of the globalization, such as increased mobility of goods and people, but also urbanization, steady population growth, and also destruction of the environment, that all has led to a dramatic increase of the likelihood of pandemics. And experts have warned since a couple of years that the risk of a rapidly spreading infectious disease is higher today than ever before in history. So this situation we have right now should not have come as a surprise if you have listened to experts in health, but also other experts who were dealing with these threats. But next to this increased likelihood of epidemic in a highly interconnected world, it is the recognition that these health events have also the ability to threaten stability and security that increase the attention of security institutions and experts toward mainly infectious diseases. So when I'm talking about health issues, most of the time I'm referring to infectious diseases. And the link between health and security, which we can again see with COVID-19, is mainly on two levels. The first level is more narrow, or it's a more narrow link. These are the effects of pandemics on the armed forces. So next to the broader society, of course, also the military is affected by infectious diseases, and this might have serious implications for military readiness. In history, the armed forces were often disproportionately affected by epidemics due to the circumstances they were living in, mainly in war situations. And therefore, in history, we find a lot of examples of wars and battles which were impacted by epidemics. Today, of course, also military personnel are sickened with COVID-19, and this, or the danger of a potential threat, or the containment measures can have implications for their readiness. For example, with view to the German military, the Bundeswehr, and their missions abroad, the training mission in Iraq is currently interrupted until mid-May because of the danger of a potential threat. The NATO's battalion troops in Lithuania, there are multiple soldiers who are tested positive. And also last week, there was a story of the effects of COVID-19 on the ultimate symbol of military power, namely the US aircraft carrier, the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier. But next to this more narrow link, there's also the broader socio-economic consequences of pandemics. First of all, it's a stress of the healthcare systems and their potential collapse, the economic destruction due to the closure of companies, restaurants, disruption of international trade, the stock markets, tourism, etc. And this all causes enormous stress on societies and states. Furthermore, the massive loss of life and the suffering of the sickened people causes also grief in the society. The fear and panic of disease mixes with worries of economic and social decline, as well as the fear of shortfall of supply. This is aggravated by the fact that the state or the state authorities impose strict measures in order to contain the disease, which intervene often in civil rights or into like the personal lives of many people. And this can create a highly explosive situation in which probably lootings or unrest might occur. And all this is even more likely in regions or countries which are fragile, which don't have strong healthcare system or supply systems, which are torn by war and conflict for many years, such as Syria, Afghanistan, or Yemen. And a lot of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa or other regions in the world, probably also Venezuela or other countries in Latin America, they will be hit very hard by this pandemic. And I believe we will see massive humanitarian catastrophes, instability, and probably also total breakdown of countries. And this again will also have implications for Europe, such as migration flows, but also other consequences which originate from an increasing unstable neighborhood. I will leave it with that because I think I already filled my 5 to 7 minutes, but probably one last thought. I could also see for example, in Germany, and I'm curious to hear from other countries, due to the massive cost of this pandemic, this will probably also start a debate on future defense spending, so cuts of future defense spending. So this is another thought I could see how health or this particular crisis could also have implications on security and defense. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm happy to take questions and comments and discuss with the other experts.
Now I'm talking. Thank you, Daniela, very much. One very brief question from my side as a moderator, because you are living in Berlin and you also represent the German voice in this conversation. What do you see regarding the debate in Germany? How strong is the security implication, the security prism in this debate on COVID?
I think it's now emerging a lot. I think in the beginning, everyone was focused on like the initial containment measures and also the economic and financial consequences. But now we see more and more a debate also about the geopolitical shifts of these crises, the future role of multilateralism, in the beginning, the missing solidarity in the European Union. So I think, yeah, we're seeing more and more a debate on this. I'm often a little bit hesitant because I think the jury is still out on so many of these developments. But of course, it's we see more and more debates about implications of this crisis also for the future world order.
Thank you. You've drawn a pretty dire picture concerning possible impacts on regions which are already fragile, and on states that might even collapse. We don't see this scenario for the region that we live in, states collapsing and big lootings and upheavals. But still, I think it is not too early to start talking about effects on the security and geopolitical situation in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is therefore my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Linas Kojala, from Lithuania, who is the director of the Eastern Europe Studies Center in Lithuania and author of some wonderful books. Recently, there was a new publication, a big star of explaining politics, international politics to Lithuanian audiences, but also explaining Lithuanian stances and positions to the world. And Linus, I think it's not a secret to say this, used to already be also be a colleague of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. He was working in one of our offices, the Lithuanian office. So it's a big pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome, Linus, and we are looking forward to your introductory statements, shifting the focus from the global level now to the region.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Dear colleagues, it's great to meet you even in this circumstances. I think it's necessary to continue discussions and exchange opinions. So it's my pleasure to present the perspective of Lithuania and the Baltic countries, maybe to some extent, in this discussion. And I would like to make at the beginning probably 5 points. First of all, surprise, surprise, I think it's a time of uncertainty. It's really difficult to make any predictions about the consequences yet, because we don't know so many important facts, whether we get immunity from the virus, whether quarantine will be extended for a month or 2 months or 3 months. Just today, Lithuanian government announced that the quarantine regime, a strict quarantine regime, will remain in place for at least 2 more weeks without any softening measures as of yet, it seems, even though some countries in Europe already talk about softening their quarantine regimes. Lithuania is not seemingly on that side yet, so we'll still have economy stagnating. So from the economy to health, we have a lot of uncertainties, and I think that makes a situation very complicated for the government. But on the other hand, I think in this uncertainty, Lithuania manages to solve the most pressing issues quite well. That's why we see a relatively low number of deaths. We also see hospitals being overwhelmed, but only to some extent. So I think we're coping and dealing with it as fine as we are able to do it in these circumstances. So first of all, I think it's the time of uncertainty, and for countries such as Lithuania, it's really difficult to make predictions. We are focusing on today's situation and trying to solve daily issues. The second thing, I think for us, again, for a small country and for the Baltic states, I think that's the same. It's very important to look at how international institutions adapt to the changing circumstances. And I'm mostly talking about NATO and EU. We've seen some better examples of this. We've seen some worse examples of this. And in terms of EU, I think we are already in phase 2, where we talk more about solidarity, where we talk more about helping each other out, rather than at the beginning, when it was seemingly a competition among allies, a competition which made it more difficult to talk about any kind of political cooperation. And I think that was bad and useful for countries which are not extremely friendly towards the West as a whole. So I think you managed to adapt a bit, and I think that's very important, because you, on the one hand, have to adapt, but on the other hand, also you have to present what you are doing. And I think in this sense, EU is doing better as well. Again, that's very important for Lithuania, because we don't see any future, any stable political future without a substantial role for the EU. In terms of NATO, I think there was less criticism, of course, of NATO, but it was very important to note, I think it was last week when foreign ministers met via teleconference, that NATO is also fulfilling its usual obligations to member states, that while pandemic is obviously #1 concern for every one of us, for every country, for every person, there are things that go beyond it, and NATO has to be ready to adapt to other kinds of threats which are still here. So in terms of its posture in Eastern Europe and in terms of its longer-term commitments, I think it was very important to get this message. And also, obviously, to see that NATO manages to think also on how to adapt to the environment and help the member countries to get the necessary medical supplies by using airlift capabilities and other means. So I think every international institution has to be able to add up to the common effort to fight this pandemic. The third thing, which was also briefly mentioned by Daniela, is concerning the defense expenditure. I think that's already being discussed to some extent here in Lithuania. I think neither of the Baltic states, nor Lithuania, nor Latvia, nor certainly Estonia, will go down in terms of defense expenditure in relations to GDP. So it will be 2%. But as GDP as a whole will probably go down significantly. We have different predictions from 2 to 7% in Lithuania. I think that's quite similar in many other European countries. That means we'll have less money to spend. And obviously that means we will be more vulnerable because for Lithuania and Latvia, especially for Estonia a bit less, to a lesser extent, the defense expenditure of 2% was needed in order to compensate for years of not spending enough on defense. So basically, since we've joined NATO, Lithuania's defense expenditure was just over 1% and even lower than 1%. So if we will maintain 2%, that's good, but that will probably mean our defensive capabilities will not be improved as rapidly as we probably expected in softer scenarios of world economic development. The fourth thing is, I think we are quite interested to look at different strategies countries employ to tackle this crisis. And obviously we're extremely interested in our neighbors. Sweden is an example of making a different kind of choice in how to tackle the crisis. And I think everyone's interested to see how the numbers go up or down, hopefully, in this country. Belarus is another case, which was getting a lot of attention worldwide because of some of the comments that the president made, some of the decisions, such as maintaining football league season and etc. And I think it's a bit of concern because obviously Belarus was very important for Lithuania and still is important, obviously, in many ways as a transit country, because a lot of Lithuanians managed to come back to Lithuania after a pandemic was announced via Minsk. Now it's closed as a gate, obviously, but in the future, I think everyone will be interested to see what's the real situation in the country and whether it really managed to contain the pandemic or we don't get a transparent sense of what's going on there. So we are obviously keen to know what's happening in Belarus. And the fifth, my last thing that I wanted to say at the beginning is concerning the US and China to some extent, probably. We're, I think, always very dependent on the US in terms of our long-term security. So in this situation, we hear a lot of criticism towards Washington for not taking up the leadership role or even having some disputes with allies, again, in terms of medical supplies, in terms of buying up ventilators and etc. So the longer-term role of the US in solving global problems and its commitment to international institutions after pandemic is more or less tackled, hopefully very soon, is an area of concern. Obviously, that also relates to its relationship with China, because I think even though we are over-focused to some extent on pandemic at the moment, we should not forget that other issues remain. 5G, investments in critical infrastructure, and other issues, they remain as relevant as they were just a couple of weeks ago. So I think this discussion has to be maintained, at least to some extent, in order to make better decisions in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Linus, for your introductory remarks. I think all of the points that you mentioned are interesting, especially one that stick to my ear is the question of the defense spending, because what we might be seeing now is a raise of the ratio of expenditure in countries. If the GDP drops, but the sum being spent on military issues will be maintained, suddenly we'll see countries making that threshold of 2% while the spending is the same, just the economy went down. And I think this might even give some fresh impulse to the question, which you also mentioned, what capabilities do we want to define? I mean, this has been a German position, us not reaching, not even being close to the 2%. Sometimes that argument being seen as a cheap excuse. But I think there is some essence to this, that the question of what capabilities should we be able to provide might even get some new momentum. One brief question to you also, because you said that the role of the US might be changing now. In Lithuania, I often hear this formula that the United States, NATO, but the US being the main country in NATO, is there for security, and the European Union is there for a better life. Do you think there might be a shift in this position in Lithuania, saying that Europe has even to provide more for the security if the US now seem to be undecided?
I don't think that the pandemic is going to be a major catalysts for this kind of shift. I think that shift to some extent already happened in 2016 when NATO enhanced forward presence was introduced as a NATO policy, and we noticed that NATO enhanced forward presence meant that we have more European countries visible here in our region, and also Canada, obviously, in Latvia, but not necessarily the US. So Germany, France, and other countries which contributed, the United Kingdom as well, I think managed to change the perception of how security decisions are being made, at least on NATO level, and that they are not always 100% dependent on what Washington decides. So to some extent, I think that happened in 2016, and I'm not sure whether it's gonna change more than that, because I think in the end, the perception here, the dominant perception, not necessarily my own opinion, is that, well, without the US security umbrella, European countries are unable to ensure the security, especially of countries in the immediate neighborhood of third countries.
Okay, thank you. One brief remark on numbers. I just checked the YouTube channel. We have 55 people following the discussion on YouTube and 10 more people following us on Zoom. Welcome to those who joined the discussion recently. If you need interpretation, English and Russian, we're going to have one contribution in Russian language in a few minutes. Please feel free to join us as a spectator on the Zoom channel. There's no interpretation on YouTube, but we have it on Zoom. So we stay in the region, and it's wonderful. It's a good segue, Linus, that you mentioned the Belarus-Lithuanian relations as one of the last points. Wonderful segue to a speaker who has already said hello to you, Evgeny Prayaman, the other intellectual mastermind behind this kind of format. As you mentioned, Evgeny, we also think to have this as a test balloon. And if this works fine, I think it's working wonderful so far, technically. We would like to have more of these discussions in the weeks to come. Evgeny Prayaman does not need any introduction to people from Belarus. I don't know who is watching on YouTube and where you're from. So I just, for those who do not know Evgeny so well, Evgeny is the director and founder of the Minsk Dialogue Council on International Relations in Belarus. A think tank that has started a few years ago and I think was registered only last year and is widely recognized as an important voice of security and global issues in Belarus. Evgeny is also pursuing a PhD in politics and international studies at Warwick University in the United Kingdom, and he's working on the how small countries deal with which foreign policy strategies small states pursue when they're stuck amid geostrategic asymmetries. Evgeny, thank you for being with us. Thank you for co-organizing this discussion. We are looking much forward to your input. You've already written at least one article that I saw on the security repercussions of the crisis. Looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Jakob, for the kind words. And since you've mentioned the article, I think I'll be repeating a few points from that article, but I think they might be important for the beginning of our discussion. So first of all, Jakob mentioned this black swan effect, and of course, it's a popular reference point right now. But strictly speaking, if we use the methodology of foresight or perspective planning, what has happened and what continues to be happening is not a real black swan. It's rather called a dirty white swan. And I don't want, of course, to get deep into the vocabulary, into this technical vocabulary, but I think it's important to understand at least two things. The first thing is that, of course, quite a few people, especially professionals dealing with epidemics, but also analyzing geopolitics in the age of globalization, they did spoke a lot about something of this type would happen at some point. And in a way, they also wanted to sort of raise the flag, trying to attract attention. But what's even more important for our discussion is that because it is not a real black swan, we seem to understand where this whole thing is leading geopolitically, at least, and I need to make this reservation, at least if we don't experience any major change of this process in the weeks or months to come. But if we stay within the current mega trend, let me call it like this, most probably what we are going to see is this acceleration of the geopolitical time, as I called it, In other words, the trends which have already been there for quite a couple of years are going to accelerate, and the outcomes of those trends will be visible quicker than they would otherwise have been. And of course, geopolitically speaking, this is primarily about this growing competition between the US and China. Again, it was quite obvious that the competition was there. It was enough to read a couple of conceptual documents by the Trump administration, for instance, the national security concept, but also to look at the titles of a number of prestigious Western conferences. And what was particularly striking was the name of the latest Munich Security Conference report. As you all remember, it was called Westlessness. So we did anticipate this. But at the same time, I personally had a feeling, talking to numerous decision makers as well as experts, that while those words were pronounced, there wasn't this real understanding and acceptance of the fact that some fundamental changes were progressing and were going on. And of course, one of the impacts of this particular situation we're having with the pandemic now will be that we will have to accept that. Again, geopolitically speaking, it means that we cannot really compare the situation of today to a war effect in international relations, because you also know that throughout the history of international relations, most of the fundamental changes or structural changes, as we would usually put it, would happen or would take shape after huge calamities, and namely wars. And some people now tend to think whether this pandemic can play the role of a war in terms of reshaping the world and helping states to agree on a certain new system. I doubt, and I think this is bad news, because what's most probably going to happen is that this competition between the US and China and all the other effects which will follow are just going to be aggravated to the most unpleasant states, where not only opposing or critical rhetoric is there, but some really painful actions might be undertaken by states. And that all means that we're really thrown into what you might call uncharted waters. But again, not in terms of what we can expect, because I think a lot of things are quite easy to predict, but in terms of how we manage this uncharted waters. And this is, of course, a huge challenge for this part of the world, for Eastern Europe, because historically, and we can see it right now, too many contradictions and too many conflicting points have been gathered and concentrated in this part of the world. And whenever you have some geopolitical problems or geopolitical winds blowing from the outside, you will always find a lot of cracks which result from those winds in Eastern Europe. So I would be quite, well, not pessimistic, but quite worried about the future of this part of the world. But having said that, I do join this argument and accept it that now that every state will be stripped of resources and will have to be more efficient in resources, most probably less political attention will be paid to all sorts of military stuff, let's call it this way. And to a certain extent, it might be good news, because at least in terms of the situation in Eastern Europe, it might help to ease the security dilemma, which has been growing over the last several years. The dilemma, which is, again, a classical situation in international relations, with some states on NATO side trying to deter Russia by building their own capacities, which in turn provoke the Russians to do the same. Or you can make the opposite argument, saying that the Russians were the first to provoke the other side. But in any way, the security spiral was there. So the situation we're having now might play a positive role in slightly easing that security dilemma. But on the opposite side of this argument is another point to be made, is that when you have less political attention towards security in the region, it means that less political attention and also financial resources will go into things like arms control. We'll publish a small but a very insightful commentary on this in a few days. But it's important to pay attention to the fact that even negotiations about what remains to be there in terms of the arms control after quite a few pillar agreements are dead now. So what remains there is now getting less and less attention. And you know that now the Americans and the Russians agreed to postpone inspections for a couple of weeks or months. And of course, this is very much understandable under present conditions. But then the question is, what happens after we start returning to, well, not business as usual, but more usual lives? Against the background of all those discussions that arms control should be destroyed, and all those arguments on the American side that instead of the bilateral arms control system, the Chinese should join the system, and of course the Chinese are not at all willing to do that. So there is a risk that the current situation will only destroy what we already have in terms of arms control and not help us in creating something new. And the very final point I want to make here is more sort of ideological, but I think it has a clear and direct relation to geopolitics as well. I think what we are observing right now is a huge disillusionment and a huge blow to multiple ideas that all of us held after at least the collapse of the bilateral system and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. You remember the discourse about the end of history, and now, of course, the author of that discourse makes a lot of points saying that he didn't really mean all those things and he accepts some of his own faults. But I think we're really seeing a huge disillusionment now, especially in terms of civil societies, in those ideas. And it's important politically because before, a lot of people would make their own expectations about the world and about geopolitics based on those ideas. They always thought that if you go for certain reforms economically or politically, then certain new opportunities are going to open up for you, that multilateralism was a huge benefit of modern society. And now that more and more people talk about the collapse of multilateralism, and of course I don't share that point, but still the discussion is there. And a lot of people are talking about the return of the state, and some people are looking for recipes in quite authoritarian approaches. This is a huge fundamental question to that set of beliefs that many people held, and especially in Eastern Europe, because I think a lot of what happened over the last several decades here, including the EU enlargement, NATO enlargement, they were based on those ideas. So this is a huge, huge test for this region also in terms of ideas. And I think I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Eugenii. Could you elaborate on that last point just a bit more? How is it a disillusionment? I mean, how is multilateralism proven wrong by there being a pandemic?
Well, perhaps I should put it differently. The very fact that numerous key actors, and primarily the United States, are increasingly starting to behave in a unilateral way, I think this sends this very clear message to a lot of other nations, including smaller states, that perhaps they should do something about their own security on their own. Perhaps they should no longer hold those beliefs in multilateralism as they used to hold before. And again, that doesn't change the overall rationale of states, especially smaller states in international relations, because for a small state, multilateralism is always a good thing because it makes smaller states more powerful. It gives it more resources. But when you see the key players stepping away from a few key fundamental principles of multilateralism, of course, you cannot but be a little bit disillusioned about this whole thing.
Well, as Lina said, some new players might be willing to take that space if somebody is about to leave a vacuum. But that's something for the discussion maybe later. Thank you, Eugenii. Now from the region, we would like to go to a more abstract and overarching level. Again, we have two more experts joining us with their insights. And the first of them is joining us from the UK, where the Prime Minister has just been put not only to the hospital, but to intense care last night. So if that is not a security issue, well, it is. We wish him all the best, of course. So Yelena Korostelyeva, who was originally from Belarus, but has been living and working in the UK for quite some time. I think she's the only one of our speakers today who has her own Wikipedia article, at least the only one that I've found. So if that is not a distinction. Thank you so much for being with us. Jelena Krostleva is the Professor of International Politics and the Director and Founder of the Global Europe Center at the University of Kent in the United Kingdom. She is Deputy Head of School and the Principal Investigator at the Compass Project, which works together with the Cambridge University and seeks to establish hubs of excellence in countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia for research integration, impact governance, and sustainable communities. Compass Project is one of the co-organizers. Thank you for being with us today. Jelena, we're looking much forward to your points.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jakob. And hello, everyone. Just to say, we have this growing discussion about the implications of coronavirus amongst our consortium and also wider field. And we've recently launched the portal called Crisis Reflection. So you're very welcome actually to visit it. And I hope that Rosa and Jenya's comments in particular will soon appear there. But we have actually reflections now coming from China, from the region Central Asia, the Caucasus and the Eastern Europe, but also from the European Union there as well. But also, just to draw your attention, there is also quite active LSE Dahrendorf forum where we are contributing to with our comments, so something to look out as well. So the five, I would like to make five short points today, which I hope will contribute to wider discussion and question and answer session later on, which relate mainly to what is going on in Europe, but also are likely to have implications for the wider Europe and Central Eurasia in particular. Well, one of the implications, I think, very important implications that Jenny already referred to, although he said that he did not subscribe to that particular debate, is actually the kind of the return of the state. And I'd put it in a slightly different way. I put it in a way that what we witness today is kind of the rise of more regulatory governance, more centralized governance, driven by a motive to take back control, which is one of the controversial measures that have been seen by established democracies. We see increased number, of course, of the police patrolling the streets, but also the army on the standby in case if disorder were to occur. We also have regulatory constraints on all sorts of freedoms, freedom of movement, and also legal debates emerging and measures. Of course, some countries in the EU already display some extreme measures in terms of legal actions. And from what I've heard from my colleagues also in Germany, somebody referred to it like legal revolution. So there is an increased discussion as to, whether certain measures taken today would have actually legal repercussions for our future as established democracies. This, I think, is taken even to more extreme levels in developing countries. And this is very interesting to observe there as well and discuss it later. So that's the first point as to how we got there, but also how we're going to come out of it in terms of rebalancing what we have now. The second point, which was actually raised by one of our colleagues in China, is clearly the signs of possible, emerging economic slowdown and possible signs of recession. In fact, I think it was very much followed by media portal, including Euractiv. In fact, what has been said, Angela Merkel said in particular, that the EU is now facing its greatest challenge since its foundation, precisely referring to the economic slowdown and signs of recession. And if anything, for example, French economists have been discussing that France is actually facing its worst recession since 1945. And clearly, we are not going to be in that boat alone. Looking at the signs of the previous recession, it hit the world really hard. And some countries are still experiencing the echoes of it. So I think if this were to come, I think measures, and the debate, of course, is currently ongoing in Europe, and there is this massive clashes concerning what some refer to is Corona bonds or Euro bonds in order to ensure to mutualize debt. But of course, the discussion is far wider than that. And how European states are going to weather with it will have long-standing consequences, of course, for the wider neighborhood and the world as well. So the third point I'd like to make is not just the return of the state, but also the return of borders and I'd say kind of nationalist politics and to a degree breakdown of solidarity. It's not something that perhaps I would agree with myself, but the observation is there that it looks like, so even within the EU, what has emerged is that the first response to the crisis was actually precisely to shut borders and try to deal with the issues ourselves, which is kind of paradoxical in the face of the global nature of the pandemic. And the calls referring to the breakdown of solidarity, they're particularly pronounced now, and there is a lot of blame game going on, even on the level of EU institutions, you know, when some European leaders come to discuss issues, how to address pandemic. Others are not invited. The most recent one was with reference actually to excluding David Sassoli, the European Parliament president, from talks about EU response to coronavirus and so on and so forth. So these kind of spats and clashes of opinion, they actually send their own message about EU solidarity to the wider neighborhood, but also they clearly show cracks in terms of how to address this problem, although some level of preparedness should have been in place as has been referred by Daniela at the beginning. And nevertheless, if anything, I think we need to consider how to deal with it post-factum, post-coronavirus, because I think this lingering sense of nationalism and populist undertones, they will be here for a long time for us to hear. The fourth point is actually, as it was referred by our colleagues in Central Asia, is this double-edged globalization effect. By what I mean by that is actually, on the one hand, globalization clearly pushed countries towards greater connectivity, which is one of the EU initiatives, but also on the other hand, as this particular crisis showed, is that this connectivity exposed and actually in interdependence actually exposed the vulnerabilities of developing countries who, for example, in their growth were particularly dependent on the aid provided by China, and which went into shutdown first. And it clearly affected each individual states in many different ways. But it also gave them a lesson to consider and learn in the future how perhaps kind of regional cooperation may enhance their sustainability in the future, and what needs to be done in order actually to be a bit more self-reliant in that particular case. The final point that I would like to make is actually very close to my heart. There is a growing discussion about resilience, and resilience is a key word in a lot of EU documents, but also a lot of international institutions. And just to kind of pour fire a little bit, oil into this debate, I think some scholars provocatively claim that what we witness today actually, if anything, is the end of resilience, because what this crisis exposed particularly vividly is that people are weak, irrational, they cannot really be left alone to deal with the crisis themselves. And what is asked of them now, and that's where the return of the state seems so important, is that they need to retreat, they need to hide, they need to withdraw from public life precisely to save themselves, but also save others. This clearly speaks to the fact that perhaps resilience, as we know it, as the way to to self-organize, to mobilize, to respond to crisis in a better way, may seem to be dead or dying a very slow death. That's what a lot of scholars come to argue now, and that it is irrelevant as a strategy in terms of preparedness. But my argument here would be actually different. We witness the death of resilience in neoliberal terms, the way that, you know, the state that has taken control away from us as the people now clearly want that control back. And I think what is important for us to see that how we respond now at the level of the person and communities. And personally, I think the crisis, especially in the UK, would have been even worse if it wasn't how the society responded to the crisis and how people themselves got involved in helping out the vulnerable and responding to the lack of resources and preparedness by the state to adequately respond to the crisis. We would have been, if it wasn't for that, we would have been in a far worse situation. So it's not the death of resilience. It is actually the rebirth of self-governance. And that's what I particularly commend the people of Europe and the world for. I stop there.
Thank you, Elena. Wonderful how you already shifted this last point. That would have been my question to you. If rather than the death of resilience, we don't rather see that people maybe now learn the lesson of how to really organize resilience so that it will be able to work. Same goes for the globalization. Just as one short question back to you, would you say this is, you said there's double effect on globalization. Could this not be the incentive to move globalization to the next level, where you actually make this more also resilient by having this local or regional layer of this rather than having everything just go around the globe? And could this not lead to more integration on the European continent, maybe even beyond the European Union's borders?
I fully agree that there will be a lot of lessons to learn clearly from this crisis, which is not finished yet. And one of them is, of course, what actually the meaning of globalization, because, of course, when we come to think about globalization, it's actually something that the initiatives that mainly come in top down, you know, with all these kind of ready-made templates and how you can actually expedite the growth from learning from other global experiences simply by connecting, aiding, assisting, and so forth. But what we often forgot that and this is something that actually we are going to discover with one of our new projects by looking at communities, for example, at Fergana Valley and also in Belarus, areas like Soligorsk and so on, how actually globalization hits local communities who are not able to voice their concerns at the adequate level. And what is important, precisely looking at the crisis now, how communities should be far greater involved, including, of course, by communities, I mean local authorities as well, who come to kind of govern those communities, have greater voice and greater say in terms of how globalization could and should be managed. Because at the moment, what we see, of course, is all the state decisions about the benefits of global investment, which do not always chime well and resonate with the needs and kind of resources available on the ground. And that creates problems and clearly backlashes. And that's what coronavirus and this dependency on external resources clearly showed and exposed as one of the vulnerabilities that countries experience, especially in Central Asia.
Thank you. It is now almost 3 o'clock. Linus said before starting the conversation that he will have to leave for another obligation at around 3. So I think we can already say thanks to Linus for having joined us for this conversation. Unfortunately, no, not for the discussion, but thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. Sorry for leaving early, and have a nice the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Please stay healthy.
You too.
Bye-bye. So at the same time, while saying goodbye and farewell to Linus, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the last of our speakers, Rosa Turarbekova, who is an associated professor at the Department of Foreign Relations of the State University of Belarus in Minsk. She's the director of the Center for Research of the Eurasian and European Research. And she is joining us despite the dire conditions in which the university is working at the moment, that she is working from home office in what we see as her personal arts gallery. So thank you so much for being with us today, Rosa. We said that you will be delivering insights on, you said, 5 big challenges that are now being exacerbated or reinforced by the virus. So I think this is a wonderful last statement to conclude these introductory statements.
Спасибо большое. Во-первых, разрешите поприветствовать организаторов, фонд Конрада Аденауэра, Минский диалог. И спасибо вам большое, что вы пригласили меня как спикера и центр как соорганизатора для того, чтобы вот сделать это мероприятие. И для этого дела я наконец-то за столько дней карантина одела платье и даже сережки, и чувствую себя уже не в такой изоляции, как до сих пор. Мне это придает определенных сил эмоциональных. И сейчас позвольте мне поприветствовать, помимо, конечно, спикеров замечательных, Лену Коростылеву, которую я давно уже очень не видела, которой хочу большой привет передать и сказать, что я недавно выпустила статью по Евразийскому экономическому союзу на английском языке, вышлю вам обязательно, где цитирую Лору Делкур и вас цитирую в том числе. Вот. И самое главное, я хотела бы поприветствовать своих студентов факультета международных отношений, на которых пришелся первый фактический удар коронавируса в Беларуси, потому что они были первыми, кого в достаточно массовом порядке изолировали, поскольку они оказались контактами некоторые первого, некоторые второго уровня, и они продолжали работать, уже находясь в больнице. Сейчас их большинство выписали, сейчас они за нашей с вами дискуссией следят. И я хотела бы к вопросу о resilience, Елена, вот к вопросу к вашего последнего тезиса, что может вселить определенный оптимизм, может быть, не действие администрации Трампа или китайского правительства, вот, но может быть действие наших студенческих сообществ, которые реагируют на сложные ситуации, например, как то наши студенты организовали собственный телеграм-канал «Коронация» с тем, чтобы, ну, по крайней мере, представлять свою информацию, свою точку зрения на то, что происходит у них. И это для меня на долгие дни, на долгие недели, вот последние 3 недели стало одним из основных каналов информирования качественного. Уже не говоря о той волне организации взаимопомощи, которая сейчас наблюдается в гражданском обществе в Беларуси, в котором мы все, ну, так как можем, мы принимаем участие финансово, как волонтеры, как инициаторы. Я знаю множество примеров, просто мне люди не дали полномочий говорить о том, как они пытаются поддержать друг друга и пытаются поддержать наши медицинские учреждения, в частности, врачей и социальных работников. Вот в рамках одного из таких проектов, например, я тоже скромно поучаствовала. Поэтому, Елена, я думаю, что все-таки идея, концепция resilience, она не умрет, и она не должна умереть. И для этого мы будем делать все не ради концепции, а ради людей в первую очередь. Ну и теперь уже к моему выступлению. Называется оно очень амбициозно, и я заострю некоторые моменты, которые мы с вами обсуждаем. Может быть, иногда я буду выглядеть не очень профессионально, я прошу прощения, но здесь скорее будет эмоциональное выступление. У меня дома фактически разворачивается дискуссионный клуб между 3 представителями разных специальностей. Мой супруг, который является антропологом, мой сын, который является экологом, и я, который представляю международные отношения и политические науки. Мы день и ночь обсуждаем то, что происходит. Вот, и пытаемся каким-то образом участвовать в различного рода мероприятиях и даже определенных инициативах. Вот. И в этой связи мое выступление есть результат этой дискуссии, вот, внутри междисциплинарной, но тем не менее внутрисемейной. Первое – это вызов, который, как я считаю, называется, это мое название, но, может, не очень профессиональное, вестфализация, то есть возвращение к вестфальским принципам системы международных отношений, оно бросает на нас тень, это вестфализация. Второй вызов, который возникает вот буквально сейчас, и в Беларуси идет очень серьезная дискуссия, это экономистичность мышления, тогда, когда речь идет о спасении общества и сохранении его здоровья. Что здесь первично и почему очень часто экономическая целесообразность, в частности, в Беларуси выступает на первый план в качестве официальной позиции. Третье – это глобализация, мобильность. И, извините, это мое сейчас такое странная, наверное, реакция, культ удовольствия. Я потом поясню, о чем идет речь. Четвертое – это рост киберпространства, в котором мы сейчас принимаем участие. Мы увеличиваем это киберпространство. И его вестфализация, то есть вестфализация самого киберпространства, вызов и угроза установления государственного контроля над нами через киберпространство. И пятое, то есть это связано с правами, конечно, человека. И пятое, это, наверное, самое сложное для меня, но тем не менее я не могу исключить его из глобальных угроз. Я бы даже поставила это на первое место. Это климатические изменения, как невидимый, но решающий фактор того, в чем мы сейчас находимся. И что касается первого пункта, то, к сожалению, то, о чем говорили предыдущие спикеры, проблема, связанная с кризисом солидарности, я бы заострила бы это даже еще больше и назвала, вспомнила бы древних, которые говорили «homo hominis lupus est». К сожалению, сейчас мы под воздействием страха перед вирусом видим очень разные реакции людей, даже разных групп и политических сил, когда мы можем, например, наблюдать даже рост таких правых радикальных настроений не только в странах Европейского Союза, но и в Восточной Европе. Я, в частности, в различного рода, извините, дискуссиях в Фейсбуке вижу очень страшные заключения, в том числе и по поводу того, что этот вирус является способом избавиться от слабых, например. Такого рода высказывания есть в нашем пространстве, я имею в виду в пространстве Фейсбука. Вообще вот эта проблема, связанная со страхом, с одной стороны, и с другой стороны, желанием государства усилить контроль, я думаю, что это станет одним из самых страшных вызовов для нашего региона, потому что мы имеем не очень большой опыт независимости и очень большой опыт принуждения и буквально роста насилия во имя каких-то общих целей за счет жизни, человеческих жизней целых групп, в том числе даже социальных групп, к сожалению. Вот здесь есть такая проблема. Вторая проблема – это то, что очень быстро мы переходим к идеям протекционизма и государственного контроля над обществом. Слишком легко. Это происходит почти что автоматически в нашем регионе, потому что это было совсем недавно, и вспоминаются просто привычные механизмы контроля, которые в общем и целом на самом деле не очень далеко ушли, они достаточно быстро реанимируются. Экономистичность мышления, кстати говоря, тоже связана, как это ни странно, с этим. Знаете, я вот с антропологом своим супругом разговариваю, он говорит о том, что вот эти игры со статистикой, тогда, когда речь идет о смертности, и делается акцент на том, что в основном подвержены этому люди с возрастных групп, да, и таким образом идет определенная, извините за выражение, легитимация отказа от карантина. В частности, это очень сильно напоминает некоторые антропологические вещи, такие как геронтоцид. Геронтоцид – это убийство стариков, как сокращение количества ртов в случае, если возникает голодная смерть. Поэтому, когда рассуждение экономистичности мышления о том, что надо отдавать приоритет экономике, иначе общество пострадает, и в случае, если необходимо пожертвовать, значит, люди старше 70 лет, мы можем их дистанцировать, изолировать, но в общем и целом фактически мы ими в определенном смысле жертвуем. Я думаю, что это одна из самых серьезных угроз и вызовов вообще, в принципе, нашим моральным принципам. И мне кажется, что вот мы недооцениваем, к сожалению, эти вещи, но они имеют очень большой эффект на общественное мнение. Хотя на самом деле я хочу предупредить, что все эти цифры, они были построены на китайской модели, которая, как сейчас выясняется, есть определенная проблема, связанная с верификацией данных. Я имею в виду вот в том числе и вот эту возрастную структуру по смертности. И вот эта проблема экономистичности мышления, или это так называемая новая экономическая целесообразность, я ее именно в кавычки беру, может повлечь за собой серьезные последствия. В частности, вот в Беларуси у нас, к сожалению, вы знаете, ситуация не такая, как в Швеции. Не надо нас, пожалуйста, сравнивать со шведской моделью, потому что в Швеции есть определенные, скажем, правила социального дистанцирования, есть определенные ограничения, есть сознательность, так скажем, гражданская, связано с этим социальным дистанцированием. В Беларуси с точностью да наоборот, мы готовимся к параду, у нас проводился футбольный матч, у нас отменяются массовые мероприятия только под давлением со стороны гражданского общества. Так, ну, гражданское общество в Беларуси не очень влиятельно, вы знаете, но тем не менее мы стараемся. Вот, собирается, например, петиции подписывают в пользу карантина, особенно это касается школ и университетов. Мы до сих пор находимся не в карантине. Единственное наше достижение – это то, что родители все-таки добились продления школьных каникул на 1 неделю. Все это вместе на самом деле является признаком экономистичности мышления, в частности, белорусского правительства. Но я думаю, что так или иначе этот изъян или эта проблема, она существует для всех стран, которые сейчас задаются вопросом, какой процент ВВП будет утрачен за то время, когда мы будем находиться или уже находимся на карантине. И третий вызов – это глобализация, мобильность и культ удовольствия. Я здесь просто хотела бы пояснить. Я не против глобализации и мобильности ни в коем случае, но под культом удовольствия я подразумеваю то, что есть вот этот культ удовольствия, связанный с экзотическим туризмом, который в конечном итоге привел к тому, что местные сообщества, кстати, очень много стали терять, и некоторые вещи стали утрачиваться. Я помню, как один из моих знакомых в Тироле, в Альпах, я имею в виду Южный Тироль в первую очередь, ну, это и к австрийскому Тиролю относится, говорил о том, что на самом деле один турист дает больше дохода, чем 5 коров. В итоге на сегодняшний день настоящего альпийского молока
Just
очень...
very briefly, just to remind you that the 7 minutes are already more than over.
Да,
So...
я понимаю, что я последняя выступаю, и много, наверное, времени. Да, хорошо. Я заканчиваю сейчас. И здесь есть эта проблема, связанная с переоценкой этих вещей, связанных именно с культом удовольствия и с тем, что насколько местные сообщества в этой связи не столько приобретают, сколько теряют. Ну и что касается вообще, в принципе, вот, к сожалению, у меня мало времени сказать, тут очень многие есть интересные факты. Пандемии всегда сопровождались 2 вещами. Это ростом завоевательных походов или войн. И далеко не всегда вначале шла пандемия, а потом скорее наоборот, но они шли всегда рука об руку. Я хотела бы вас предупредить, что, скорее всего, будет, несмотря ни на что, исторически доказано, что пандемии способствуют росту армии и росту расходов на оборону. И в этой связи не надо, скажем так, расстраиваться тем экспертам, которые думают, что ассигнования на оборону будут уменьшаться. Нет. Скорее всего, найдутся очень много аргументов, найдется для того, чтобы увеличивать количество ассигнований именно силового сектора. И это в свою очередь повлечет за собой, кстати говоря, ну, я бы сказала, рост напряженности, в том числе и в Восточной Европе. Восточная Европа, в отличие от всех остальных регионов, я имею в виду Западной Европы, Азии, даже Центральной Азии, всегда находилась на периферии пандемии. И в этом отношении она, скажем, страдала, но это был отложенный эффект. И сейчас мы с вами почти видим ту же самую картину. Почему? Потому что вот сейчас эпицентр пандемии находится в Европе, я имею в виду Западная Европа и Северная Америка, но он будет смещаться в Восточную Европу. Другое дело, к тому времени найдутся ли ресурсы и доноры, которые захотят нам помочь. И я думаю, что в конечном итоге восточноевропейским странам придется рассчитывать в основном самих на себя. И это, в свою очередь, будет скажем так, такой цепной реакции и для протекционизма, и для роста расходов на оборону, на армию, в том числе для того, чтобы контролировать общество, свои собственные, в первую очередь, общества, потом уже, извините, по периметру границ. И, несомненно, это вызовет наступление, конечно, на гражданские права и на гражданские общества. Но, я завершаю, но государство показывает на сегодняшний день, я бы сказала, дефицит собственных организационных ресурсов. И вот благодаря, возможно, этому местное сообщество и резилиенс гражданского общества будет расти, а не за счет того, что нам будет предоставлена такая возможность, или мы дадим возможность государству нам предоставлять такую возможность. Я думаю, что гражданское общество в этом отношении должно быть более активным с тем, чтобы заниматься своими вопросами и привлекать к себе ресурсы и использовать в первую очередь внутренние ресурсы для того, чтобы поддерживать, скажем так, свою устойчивость. Спасибо. Я закончу.
Thank you, Rosa, for your contribution. Now, looking at the time, I made a horrible job as a moderator because we're now already at the end of the time that we originally set, which is why I would suggest that we extend the time for discussion for another 15 minutes. Any of our panelists who cannot stay with us for another 15 minutes. So,
Okay.
you have to leave?
No, I have to go soon because I have another meeting. My apologies.
Okay, no, it's my fault. Do you want to have a first question then before leaving?
Fine.
Okay, then I would say the panel is open for everyone else among the experts. Questions among each other. None. No questions among the panelists. Then we open up to questions that we have been receiving from our audience. Elena, do you need to be leaving now or just very soon?
I can stay until probably about 20-25 past, but my meeting starts at 30:30, so I need to prepare.
Okay. So we have one question from Asya Wisniewskaya to Daniela Braun. She is asking, what do you think would be the implications of the pandemic for global bureaucracies like the World Health Organization? Will its performance rather empower or weaken it?
I think so. Usually what we saw during the last years, every time when we had a health crisis, so for example, Ebola, we had a lot of reforms at the WHO because there was a lot of critique after the Ebola response towards the WHO, and they started some reforms. So I could imagine that after this crisis, now it's way too early, we will start to talk about what we could do better in the future. And I think this debate will also start at the WHO. I think in contrast to the response to 2014 to Ebola, the WHO is doing a much better job, but still there are some things we could do better. For example, when the WHO announced the public health emergency of international concern and on January 30th this year, usually what they do, they have recommendations for the member states, and these recommendations are not binding for the member states, and a lot of the states ignored the recommendations. So I could imagine seeing a discussion what to help the WHO to become a stronger mandate, so that member states in the future will also follow the recommendations. So I believe we will have another reform of the WHO, and that could be one possible reform.
Thank you. We have another question that reaches us through the YouTube chat from Artyom 001, not 007, but 001. To the participants, what is the future of evidence-based and responsible decision-making? Much questioned by the corona crisis, with or without change of agents like state and civil society. Who wants to take that question?
Can I've already posted the question to Cas, a kind of counter question, which might not necessarily be a good practice, but could Artyom please clarify the meaning of responsible decision making? What actually he means exactly by that evidence-based responsible decision making? What is being questioned here, and what is the meaning of the question exactly? Because it's not clear.
Okay, I think this will take some time because we have these 20 seconds delay between Zoom and YouTube. So maybe we take another question first from Vyacheslav Pazniak, who asked through Zoom. The conclusion he says that he draws from this discussion is that there will be less security for the region. And the question is, what can and should be done? Capital letters.
If I may. First of all, something I forgot to mention in my introductory lawn remarks. I think with all those risks which are growing and which are evident at the moment, there is still a bit of good news for Eastern Europe. And that has to do with the fact that within this growing geopolitical competition, which will shape the rest of the world, which is between the US and China, we are not at the epicenter of that growing competition. So Asia Pacific, or India Pacific, as the Americans like to call it right now, is going to be in the epicenter, and it's going to be much more difficult for the smaller states in that part of the world to maneuver as this competition grows. Whereas here, what we have is that besides China and the US, which will still be quite active in this part of the world, we have what IR theorists call secondary powers, and those are Russia and the EU. And then in between those secondary powers, we have a whole group of East European states. And as much as we as smaller states are going to maneuver, because we cannot have a proper strategy as we're going into this uncertainty, but so will the secondary powers, Russia and the EU. And in a way that will dissolve the overall global competition in this part of the world. And besides multiple risks, and I've already spoken about them, like arms control and the possibility that some incidents might quickly grow into a tragedy, but we also have a growing field for negotiations and agreement between all the relevant stakeholders, and even given all those differences between Russia and the EU, Russia and the Baltic states, Russia and Poland, but still the situation is going to pressurize us all into some kind of discussion. This is a huge opportunity.
Can I just add, please?
Yes, sure.
I agree with Zhenya, and in fact, there is a Chinese saying that, in fact, what crisis means in Chinese is both danger but also an opportunity. So what we will see in the future is precisely the acceleration of discussion about changing order, international order, especially involving the role of smaller states, and a renegotiating the space for liberal order, considering the rise of other voices on the global arena. But also, as I mentioned in my talk, economic slowdown and recession are very, very real dangers. So depending how the world, including China, are going to respond to it, we will see potentially that the lack of investment, which clearly props up the developing region at the moment. And therefore, I think potentially there could be challenges in terms of security in that sense. Plus, of course, how it will unfold, given the recent statement of High Representative Borrell, who actually finally put it kind of properly in the open about the not just the need, but the realities of European army that would contribute to NATO. I think this discussion clearly will have long-term implication for the wider European security and how it will all kind of unfold in the future. So there are a lot of unknowns, and we are clearly heading into the proper VUCA wall that I mentioned in the last Minsk Dialogue Forum: vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So nothing could be predicted or even strategized at this point of time.
Which just underlines the need for experts to be in a constant state of exchanging their analysis as things are unfolding and developing. Just at this moment, we get the response to the question by Artyom. To precise his own question, he means the quality and volume of information used to make decisions by those acting in the name of common good, without comparing or articulating to public results of comparing different consequences. Does that clarify the question to you, Elena?
What implications will the strengthening authoritarian tendencies in Poland have? Yeah.
So this is another question.
Well, that's the whole discussion about the return of the state, because the state precisely is that kind of machinery which is always called upon in the times of distress, adversity, and crisis in particular, and the pandemic clearly exposed that. So if there is limited trust to our human ability to respond adequately and in a rational way to the crisis, of course, the tendency will be for the state to take over. In fact, we've been witnessing the failure of national governments to respond adequately to crisis, and the failure of global governance to adequately respond to crisis, and all this bickering about which resources, how, when, who can provide it all. So for me, actually, as a scientist, I can see great opportunity, although we can see tendency towards strengthening the state, as Hungary clearly displayed. It is the opportunity for the people to prove the point that we actually can and must self-organize and take control, because we are not irrational and weak. We actually are adequate agents on the kind of local and global way that should take responsibility and use this as an opportunity to prove that the return of the state, if anything, is not the future.
Thank you, Elena. I think this is the last word from you, because you said you have to leave a minute ago by the latest. Thank you so much for joining this discussion.
Thank you.
Please stay healthy. And if Corona hits you, have a very
and
fast recovery.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Jakob, may I jump in to,
yes, of course,
to address Artyom's question? Just very quickly, I don't think that the current pandemic is going to change our understanding of evidence-based policies. But what's important here is that the situation shows us that, of course, science and scholarship are not limitless. As much as we would like, to have data out there to treat every single problem, data and scientific knowledge about data evolve as we move forward. And what is important here is that this is why we need political leadership, and that's how states should address those problems which cannot be handled just by technocratic means. We need political leadership, and it has been all the time throughout history that only through strong political leadership, nations came out of disasters in a way stronger than they used to be. I mean, it sounds a little bit emotional, I guess, but I think that's the only answer I can give to this question.
Okay, we have 3 minutes to the end of the prolongation that we have decided upon, and we have 3 more questions. So I would suggest I just read them out. All of them are interesting and good and helpful. And I would challenge each of the remaining speakers to take one of the questions and to answer this with one very long, if necessary, but one sentence. First question from Asya again. What implications will the strengthening of authoritarian tendencies in Poland and Hungary have for Eastern European partnership? Who wants to take this one? Rosa. Yes, Rosa. Rosa, can you hear me?
Что?
Didn't you say you want to take the
Я
question?
не берусь судить, что происходит в Польше и Венгрии, потому что это не совсем как бы моя страна специализация. Но действительно, если в Польше и Венгрии, как в странах-членах Европейского Союза, которые являются определенным примером для развития демократических институтов, принимаются такого рода решения, изменения, да, то для стран, которые находятся восточнее, я имею в виду в том числе и Беларуси, это будет определенным аргументом для усиления, если это еще возможно, авторитарных тенденций для принятия тех или иных решений, что в таких случаях аргументация будет очень простая и понятная, что даже если в Польше и Венгрии, и даже не будут указывать Польшу и Венгрию, а будут говорить в странах Европейского Союза, принимаются такие решения, то у нас, как говорится, это это легитимизирует в определенном смысле. Поэтому, к сожалению, в этом смысле у меня прогноз не очень хороший, я имею в виду усиление авторитарных тенденций. Это очень легкий ответ на очень сложный вопрос, как бороться с глобальными проблемами, с глобальными угрозами, включая пандемию. Это очень просто: возродить национальное государство, вернуть полноту суверенитета в одни руки, закрыть границы, ввести войска, ввести чрезвычайное положение, ввести изоляцию и так далее и тому подобное. При этом, ну, как бы аргументы будут в пользу достаточно хорошие приведены, в том числе и пример Польши и Венгрии. А что касается самой Польши и Венгрии, мне сложно говорить, здесь должны говорить специалисты.
Okay, thank you.
One word on
Thank you.
this.
One more question from Paul Hansbury to Daniela. How might states' pandemic responses inform future planning for biological terrorism? A big topic, as brief as possible.
Yeah, so two thoughts about that. I think a lot of the capacities we have to build in order to tackle pandemics will also help to respond to bioterrorism. So I think this is probably a plus. And the other thought, so biological research also, for doing biological research, we also have to research very dangerous pathogens. And these might also fall into the hands of terrorists. So there are these two thoughts on that. But in general, I believe that building up these capacities will also benefit responding better to biological attacks.
Thank you. And the last question to Yohini from Victor from Belarus. Do you see any positive consequences of the corona situation for society?
Well, I think we can always find positive sides of even some dramatic developments, and I don't think I should sort of provide a list of positive developments, but in a way, I think it will make, like most crises, us a bit more realistic about the world we live in and about our own capacities, our own abilities, possibilities. And it might be a painful time, because when people and societies get used to certain standards and even to certain thinking about things, which is sometimes a little bit different from the real world. But at the same time, going back to the ground, it also helps for new ideas to be born. And I think this might be some kind of a renewal internally for societies, but also in terms of international relations broader.
Thank you so much. If I check the numbers of our audience, it looks like we have 11 people that remained with us throughout the whole extended conversation on Zoom, and 40 who remained with us on YouTube. So I think if we have a real live conference, more people leave during the conversation than in this online format. I think this is a very positive takeaway for me. For me, the 5 takeaways from this discussion and the contents are, first of all, that many threats to the security that are being posed by the coronavirus are secondary. Not the primary effect on security, but the secondary threats to the organization of state, to economy, to our institutions, and to infrastructure also. So it's not primarily a big security issue, but mostly secondarily, by taking a close and a narrow definition of the term security. Secondly, of course, it's too early to draw final conclusions, but a lot of these trends that are happening now should not be taken for granted, but it's up for us to shape things. For example, the European Union has been able to turn things around, or is turning things around. We should not be fatalist, but try to make the best out of what is happening. Thirdly, globalization and resilience are being reshaped, which will mean that to a certain degree we will have a lesser extent of dependency as a post-crisis takeaway, but a reformation of this cooperation can also make things more future-proof and crisis-proof if we reorganize the way we work, think, and care about the future after this. Fourthly, the role of the state is growing. The state is back in a way, but it's not simply the administration, but it's leadership. We need people who are responsible and take decisions and do not just rely on bureaucracy. And the fifth and maybe most important point, the society is being challenged and is changing in the way it works. The society being activated, self-organizing itself, despite society being also affected by the quarantine, people being locked up at home voluntarily or by state decree, but still the way people are organizing, be it the students in Belarus at the university, or be it civil society groups which are now taking up responsibility, or be it the person. So personal responsibility, I think it's also an empowerment to a certain degree of the person to be an agent of their lives. Thank you so much to the remaining panelists. We've lost half of them on the way. This is my fault again. Sorry for not being more strict, but it's just too much new input on this this important and, say again, interesting topic. Thanks to all the audience that was following us. I think this was a successful experiment to conduct this kind of conversation online, and will be an incentive for us to move forward with more discussions, maybe going into these questions which were raised today, how the way we cooperate globally and in our countries is going to be affected and be changed, hopefully to the better in the long run. Thanks again. Please stay safe, be healthy. And again, what I just wish you, Elena, if the virus strikes you, take your time, sit at home, do not go out, have a fast recovery, and be back with us as a post-corona immune citizen. Thank you. Have a good week and a blessed holiday of Easter.
Thank you so much.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
Bye.